Welcome, everybody, to a new episode of the Dreambuildrs podcast. I am super excited for this episode because we're going to talk about the key skills for a 21st century career. Think about it: career planning, networking, effective communication, and leadership. When you think about these skills, has anyone ever told you these skills? Well, probably not really, right? So, therefore, I'm delighted to introduce to you Mark Herschberg. Now, Mark is the author of the Career Toolkit, Essential Skills for Success That No One Told You. He has been teaching nearly 20 years at MIT's Career Success Accelerator program, and he has a career spanning half a dozen industries. So, Mark, thank you so much for coming on the Dreambuildrs podcast.
Thanks for having me on the show today. It's a pleasure to be here.
So you wrote this super inspiring book, The Career Toolkit. And I would love to know, first of all, what has made you change the way you look at kind of a society and at school and universities, that made you change the way you look at their education system, and why you decided to build this book?
It came initially from some early experiences I had. I knew that I wanted to become a CTO, a Chief Technology Officer. And to get that job, it wasn't just about being the best programmer. I was pretty good at writing software, but you don't just say, well, keep writing more software and you'll be the CTO. That's how you become a more senior individual contributor. But to get into leadership and management roles, it's a whole different set of skills. And early on, I recognized that. And I began to enumerate what are the skills I need to have to get the role. The ones you mentioned: leadership, communication, team building, networking, negotiation. I realized no one ever taught me any of this. So I set out to develop it myself, and then realized I wanted everyone on the team to have these skills. Around the same time, MIT had gotten similar feedback where companies said, these are the skills we want in people we hire, not just from MIT, not just from colleges, but universally, but we can't find these either. And when I heard about that, I reached out to MIT and said, I hear you're trying to put together a class on this. I've been doing this in my companies for a little bit. Can I help? And so is this initial recognition by myself, by others, that there are these important skills and we're not covering it. And then that began the past 20 years as we figured out, what do we need to teach? How do we need to teach it? And we've had I think, a very successful track record doing so.
Wow, I absolutely love that, because when I go back and I recognize some of the parts that you're saying, when I go back to my university and I think about these skills, they really have never been taught to me, apart from perhaps career planning and leadership. But these were only perhaps 2 hours of a total program of a master's, right? And when you think, for example, about career planning, my career planning only focused on landing my first job in the multinational, and not like a complete outlook of what I wanted in my first 10 or 20 years, or what my dream job would ever look like. So now that we're talking about career planning, I would love to know what your vision is as well on how people can define what a dream job actually is.
And to your point, think of the following. You would never work on a year-long project without having a project plan. And yet we have 10, 20, 30-year careers and no plan, none whatsoever, right? That's crazy.
Yeah.
The way we need to think about is to create a plan and to recognize, just as that year-long plan for a project, that's never going to work as we put it on paper. We know you put down the plan, it's going to change. Same thing is true for a career plan, even more so because we're projecting now years in the future. So what you want to do is begin by saying, where is my destination? Where am I headed 10, 20 years in the future, right? That might be your dream job. It might be, you might not know the title. Just know, I want to do these types of things. Then once you have that idea, well, if you want to be here in, let's say, 20 years, where do you need to be in 12 years? Where do you need to be in 8 years? Where do you need to be in 3 years? Where do you want to be in 1 year? And so you backtrack from that big idea down to today, right? Just like when you have this project, if this is where you need to be in a year, where do you need to be in 6 or 9 months to be on track for it, right? And to know if you're not on track for it. So you start with that goal and then you backtrack. And just like our projects, what's happening in the near term, what you're doing in the next year, maybe 2, should be very concrete. You're not focusing on all these skills, you're just focusing on this and doing so in a very concrete way. But like our project plans, we say, well, I'm going to have regular check-ins every 6 months, every year. How do I do on this piece? Do I need to keep working on it? Or do I have enough for now? Now I'm going to move on to the next piece. And so the near term is very concrete. How are you going to execute on developing these skills, training, classes, reading, joining certain projects or companies? Further out, it's going to be fuzzier. You'll have a plan, but we know that's going to change. And so think about your career the same way you've thought about projects at work.
I love that. I would love to ask you a personal question as well, because you have been, been through many, many, let's say, jobs and careers as well. What has been like the biggest learning lesson over the past decade for you in terms of, career planning and what you want to achieve out of your career?
That you do need to be flexible and adjust. If you had asked me 20 years ago, would I ever be an author or a speaker? It's like, maybe, but it'd be about something very technical. It'd be about my cybersecurity work or my core domain. It would never be on this stuff.
Yeah,
I didn't
exactly.
even have these skills 20 years ago.
Yeah.
But by being open, by helping others, opportunities were created unintentionally, and then capitalizing on those opportunities. So while we have this plan, and this is very important because we've probably had plans at work. If you're doing a 2-year-long project, it's not uncommon for someone to say, hey, everyone, change your plans, right? We have to shift the project, or we have to cancel and work on this other project. Same thing in our careers. You might be headed towards that goal you set years ago. Along the way, you discover that's not what I want. Maybe you now have a family and you want something that's going to keep you home and less time on the road. Maybe you just have a different set of interests. And so instead of going over here, say, I'm going over here. So as you're doing that plan, make a pivot and go in a different direction. And that is totally okay. So recognize while we have our plans, we know they're going to change, and you have to reevaluate even some of the core questions continuously to take you to where you want to go now and not where you wanted to go in the past.
I love that you said that you have to be flexible as well. What you said in the beginning, right, of your answer, and like made me reflect on my own career a little bit. Like I have been, in a decade, I've been from supply chain to sales to finance eventually, and now I'm in personal development, right? So it's like a huge journey and a whole flexible journey as well. Um, and you also said something about the core questions, and I think this is super interesting. Can you perhaps tell a little bit about the core questions of a career, of landing a great career? I think this is very interesting for people to know how they can define their coming years ahead, right?
I've got a bunch of questions I lay out in the book, and they are all available for free on the website, even if you don't buy the book. The interesting thing about these questions, most of them are not about your job. So these are questions like, where do you want to live? How much money do you need to be happy? What's your family goals? What kind of impact do you want to have on the world? What types of things do you enjoy doing or not enjoy doing? Right? Do you prefer sitting in a room by yourself working on Excel spreadsheets? Or do you like to be surrounded by lots of people and working as a team? These are types of questions you want to ask yourself, not just today, but if you can also in the future. Because again, at 24, the idea of being on the road 5 days a week might be exciting, at least when there's not a global pandemic. But is that what you want to do when you're 44? Maybe not. So understand this path you're on. What's it going to be like today and in the future, and how might your values change? And so I have this series of starting questions. You can, of course, add your own. No one's going to be able to answer all of these, but just by starting to think about them, it's going to help guide you towards certain paths you might be more or less interested in as you create your career plan. And the most important thing to remember, it's not just about your job. Your job is one part of your life. It's certainly an important part, but your job is not your life. So make sure you don't just answer questions about what you want to do at work, but what you want to do in life, because you need a job that supports the life that you want.
I absolutely love what you just said there. That's really, really crucial, because when we think about career planning, we're only thinking about careers, right? That's what we get to teach in the university as well, and in school. We only think about what we're actually going to do in our jobs and not what we're going to do in our life. which is so critical as well to build a more meaningful life, and a life where we can be, fulfilled and enriched in the things that we're completely doing. Now, once we have set out a career planning, what are the key ingredients for further success um, ahead? What are kind of the elements that we need to think about in our career planning?
It helps to talk to lots of people because this is a path you haven't traveled yet, but others have. There are people who are in the roles that you are interested in, that final destination, but also the intermediate roles along the way. Talk to these people. Talk to anyone you can and ask them about their jobs, about their careers. Ask them for advice, ask them for input. Listen to it all, because that's going to illuminate the path that you are going to take. And that's going to help you define it better, because we talked about having these milestones along the way. And you need to be very clear once you're walking that part of the path, what you're doing over the next year, maybe two. You want to be very specific. What's happening 6, 7, 10 years from now, you have a general idea. You don't have to worry about that. Just like on your project, what you're doing in 3 quarters, you have a placeholder, but you don't have the details. But the way you fill in those details is from talking to people. So you want to talk to people ahead of time. So as you get there, as you get to that part of your journey, you know what specifically to do. You also don't have to do this alone. You can get feedback from hopefully your manager or HR, but also your peers, from friends. You can listen to podcasts and articles and get advice and input. What are the industry trends? What are the skills needed for the future? So stay alert. Recognize you're not on your own doing this. You can get input from lots of sources and continually revise and update your plan.
Great, Mark. Now, you said, get out there and approaching people. I can imagine that for some people that might be kind of daunting. So, like, what are ways that you can like build your network actively, especially for people that are perhaps introverts, that are not so easily reaching out to others as extroverts? But what are ways that people can simply reach out to grow and build their network?
One thing to remember about this question specifically when you're trying to get advice is people love to talk about themselves. When you ask someone, tell me about yourself, tell me about your job, give me advice. I think you are important. I want to know about you and I want to listen to you. You are flattering the other person, and everyone loves to be flattered. Now, it doesn't mean you can walk up to a busy CEO and say, tell me about your career. Recognize people have time constraints, but certainly most people are happy to talk about themselves. And when we network, one of the things that scares us about going up to other people is that sense of rejection. Hi, I'm Mark. Yeah, sorry, Mark, like I gotta go do a phone call. I took that a little personally. Something's more important than me. I'm not important. That's what we're all afraid of. But certainly when basically your intention, your questions are, tell me about you. People love to hear that question. So that's going to increase your chances of success. So don't worry about the rejection, right? Hopefully, as you understand this, as you experience it, you realize people do like talking about themselves. Now, more generally, here's the thing about networking. We have this Hollywood image in our head of that super extroverted person who walks into a crowded room and walks out with 20 business cards. There are people who can do that, and that is one way to start networking. But networking isn't about collecting cards, it is about building relationships. If you've ever had a friend, you know how to network. You know how to build a relationship. You don't have to walk into the room of 1,000 people and meet 20 of them. You can meet people one-on-one. You can get together with people for coffee. You can meet people and just have small casual conversations, not in a crowded room. So recognize there's more than one way to network. Is simply about getting to know someone, and that's something all of us can do.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And now that we live in COVID times, I think it's also like, okay, things are slowly opening up, right? But networking hasn't been the same networking as it used to be before. Do you perhaps have some tips for people to like how we can reach out online to the correct people that we want to connect to?
COVID was actually a blessing for networking. Horrible in general, but it was a blessing for networking. Now, most people when COVID hit said, this is terrible. I can't go out. I can't meet people. I can't get those business cards. And certainly the online networking, you go to a virtual event, they say, here's our virtual networking room. Not great. But here is why it has helped networking, because networking, as I said, it is relationship building. It is not collecting business cards. It is not adding people on LinkedIn. It is relationship building. So after you meet someone, you have to build a relationship. That takes time. That takes multiple interactions. Traditionally, we have interacted with people locally. I'm going to meet other people in New York City. Let's get together for coffee, or run into this person at some evening event. I'm not going to meet someone in London or Tokyo because I'm not spending a lot of time there. If I go there, I'll say, oh, I'm in town. I hope we can get together. And if I had reached out to someone in 2017 and said, hey, listen, let's jump on a Zoom call and catch up, that person would look at me and say, what are you talking about? First, what's Zoom? Why do I want to stare at a video screen? This is weird. This is awkward. But it's normal today. And so we can do relationship building globally. We're no longer confined just to people in our cities. If you are still working from home, or if you're going to be in a job that's going to be semi-remote, think about the commute time you're saving. You're probably saving half an hour a day that you're not commuting. So you might be saving a few hours a week. Take just 1 half-hour block. So you know what? Thursdays, I don't drive into the office. Thursdays will be my catch-up day. And each Thursday morning, the time you would have spent driving into work, do a virtual coffee with someone. Just reach out, say, hey, you know what? We haven't caught up in 6 months. Are you free next Thursday? I'd love to just do a virtual coffee, catch up. How are you doing? So we can use this time savings, and we can use the fact that we're all online to really continue to build those global connections and not just wait for the serendipity of being in the same city.
Love that. I love that. I love that. Because since COVID, actually, like if I look at my own networking, has been so much simpler as well to reach out to people and like be globally interacted with so many other, great individuals as well. So that's also one of the reasons why I'm having my podcast, of course. And it makes it so much easier. So it's been fantastic so far. Now, Mark, I want to jump into effective communication. And I think one of the ways, what is very important for us as well, is how we are displaying ourselves. Also, when we approach other people, for example, on LinkedIn, on social media, like what are for you some key ingredients to start building your own personal brand?
Those are two slightly different issues. In terms of your personal brand, you want to understand how you are perceived. My friend Dory Clark has a wonderful exercise. Go around to your coworkers or your friends, whatever group you're worried about your brand and perception, and ask people and say, can you just give me 3 adjectives that describe who I am? Just any 3 adjectives. And you ask this from a number of people. Put all those adjectives together and see, is there a pattern? Are lots of people describing you a certain way? And is that the way you want to be perceived? If it is, wonderful. If not, think about how you want to be perceived, and then what steps can you take to be seen in this new light, right? So you first have to assess where you are, figure out where you want to go, and then you create that plan to get there. So that's a very simple way you can start to change how you are perceived at your company, within your profession, or among your social set. When it comes to communication, the key thing is we have to remember that we all communicate differently, and there is a cost to that. So let me give you an example. If I was going to do a talk in Germany, I don't speak German, so I'm going to go over there and I'm going to speak in English. And everyone in the audience, who will most likely be native German speakers, will listen. They might know English, but in their heads, they're going to have to translate everything I say into German. I'm making them do a little extra work, and that's effort. That's mental effort spent on the translation, not on receiving the message. It's almost like if your CPU on your computer had to spend 10% of its processing power translating into a different type of format. Like, okay, well, my computer is running a little slower because I have this overhead. That's how people work as well. If I can speak German, then I can get 100% of their attention, 100% of their capacity focused on the message. It's easier to sell. There's no mental tax. Now, most of us are going to be communicating in the same language, and you're not going to learn German and Flemish and French and Chinese and every language out there. We can't. But what we can learn is our different communication styles. So as just a basic model, think about very left brain people and very right brain people. We think differently, we communicate differently. If I'm speaking to someone who is very left brained, I'm going to communicate in a certain way that's different than if I'm speaking to someone who's very right brained. And that's a very simple breakdown. I go into more detail about some different models, some different ways you can approach this, but that's the basic concept, to recognize we all have different communication styles, and you want to match the style of the recipient to get that resonance and not charge that extra tax that's going to take away brain power from focusing on your message.
That's very interesting. And I want to jump into that, because how do you actually identify a different communication style of someone else? Because that's crucial when you want to adjust your communication, right?
Yeah, I mean, if we just take this left brain, right brain example, I'm gonna draw an extreme stereotype for illustrative purposes. Imagine you walk into someone's office and they are wearing a well-pressed suit and everything on the office is squarely aligned and organized and very neat, versus the more artistic person where the office is a mess and there's things strewn about and there's games and toys and they're dressed kind of casually. I don't just mean casual clothing, but just kind of threw things on. You say, okay, well, of these two people, one seems a little more organized and left-brained and the other a little more right-brained. That's, again, an extreme example for illustrative purposes, but as you start to build this model of different types of people, as you speak with them, as you listen to them, as you begin to understand the languages, you'll hear how these people communicate, and you'll recognize their styles through their behaviors, their actions, their mental models, and then you can respond back in their language. So it comes from experience.
All right. Now let's jump over to leadership. What means leadership for you, actually?
I define influential leadership as different than positional leadership. And this is a common approach used by many leadership trainers. Most people think of leadership positionally. I have a certain title, people report to me, I can tell them what to do, I am leading them. That's managing. Leadership is not about commanding, right? That is a control motif. When we think about the best leaders, when we think about world leaders, they're not saying, I order you to do this. Think about someone like Gandhi. Gandhi had no authority. Gandhi couldn't order millions of people to go oppose the British. In fact, he said, I have no influence. Now I'm asking you to do something that puts you at risk. Right? He says, I have no authority, not influence. But he had that influence and people followed him, and that was leading. So leading is influential. Leading is where you can convince people to go along with a cause, to go in a certain direction where you can't control or bribe or cajole them into doing it. And that's really what leadership is about. What this means is that all of us have the capacity to be a leader. So don't think, well, I don't have a title. It's those people who are directors or vice presidents, they're the leaders, and I'm just an entry-level person. Nope, even right out of school, even if you're the most junior person, you can lead by proposing a direction and convincing other people to go along with it.
I love that. Because that's also an essential part of what Dreambuildrs is all about, right? You know, real personal leadership, and that you can actually own and stand for who you truly are and actually carry that out. If you look to your own personal journey, like what has been a way that you really found your purpose and now really start living it out? Can you tell a little bit about that?
It took me a little time to figure out what I wanted to do. Certainly right out of school, I didn't have a direction. I was floating around a little, arguably maybe lost some time, but I don't think that's a big deal. And it's fine if you happen to be in your 20s and you're not quite sure what you want to do, you're still exploring. Nothing wrong with that. So for me, it was recognizing I need to go somewhere. In fact, I'll share the kind of motivational story. I was at a company where I joined this company and I liked it there. I liked the people. I was learning a lot about software development. And then one day my boss says to me, well, this may be a surprise to you or maybe not, but I'm leaving the company and I'm going to go start a new company. he and the other founders of this company had a falling out. So the company split in two, and he invited me to go with him to this new company. Meanwhile, the other founders knew he was leaving and taking people, and they said, look, we know he's offering you a job. We like you. We'd love you to stay here. And I had a choice to make. I could stay or I could go to this other company. How am I going to decide? I had to start thinking about what is it I want and what's the direction I want to go in. And then, of course, I realized I had more than two options because there's other companies. Why should I limit myself to these two? I started thinking about where am I going, and then where that whole career plan, where the skills I need to build, which job is not simply going to pay me more, but help me along that development journey to get me to where I want to go. And that's what got me started down this path, as well as learning some of these other skills that helped me to become who I am today.
Wow, wow, wow. All right, Mark. So I would love to wrap up with one final question, and that is like, what will be your main takeaway for everyone listening right now in order to start building their dream career?
You need to create a plan. It's not set in stone, doesn't have to be perfect, but start by creating a plan. Start with those questions that are free on the website. As you answer them, it's going to help determine the direction you want to go in. And then once you have a sense of your destination, might be a specific job title, might just be a general idea, you can backtrack from there to build out your plan. And remember, the plan's not set in stone. You can continue to revise it. So build that plan today.
All right, guys, build that plan. Thank you so much, Mark, for coming on the Dreambuildrs podcast. Now, before you go, please feel free to share where people can find you, your website, your social media links. I know you have some resources as well that you might be able to share where people can eventually download the Career Toolkit. But please go ahead.
You can go to my website, thecareertoolkitbook.com. There you can learn more about the book. You can see where to buy it. Amazon, electronically, Kindle, Apple, supposedly Barnes & Nobles. You can also get in touch with me on the website. You can follow me on my social media links. So I'm on a lot of different channels: LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. You can also download the free app. There's a free app that goes with the book that has a lot of the great tips. And once you open it, as long as you open it once every 30 days, it's going to pop up like a daily affirmation, but with tips from the book to help keep it top of mind. Completely free. And then the resources page I mentioned, that has that free list of questions, as well as links to other resources I talk about in the book, links to other books if you want to go deeper on some of these topics, and a development program you can use at your company or in a local group you create to help you further your personal development. All of this is available on the website, thecareertoolkitbook.com.
Thank you so much, Mark. I'm going to encourage everybody to go there and follow Mark. Mark, thank you so much for all of your insights, for all of the inspiration and this beautiful conversation that we just had about career planning and all of the other skills that we need in the 21st century. Mark, thank you once again, and I'm looking forward to see you soon.
Thanks for having me on.